How's it going, YouTube? Coming to today with another video, and today, guys, what the video is going to be the updated word at Handtrap for Nationals. So this is going to be really important, especially if you still need your invite from an LCQ, a last-second regional, or you are going to Nationals and you want to do well, and you want to have enough information going into the event to make a lot of your deck choices more correctly and really be able to test more accurately. If you haven't already checked out my sponsors over on Gem, Cloud, Arla, Imperium, Dragonshield, RW, MainPhaze, and Grimoire, definitely go ahead and do so down below in the description. And then if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so we can hit our goal at 30,000. There are going to be a couple breakers sprinkled in here. I did add Super Poly in just about every slide. I really do like Super Poly, and I want to make sure that you understand where it's really good, where it's really bad, and if there's any like off targets that you can use, just so you have that as another piece of information, because sometimes you really do need a breaker even if you are playing hand traps as well, just because it can make it that much easier on you during your match. Now, the first one I have for today is going to be Branded. So, Branded is a very interesting matchup because whenever I play against Branded, I always look at it as like the bunch of stuff deck, right? When you play against Branded, you're kind of just playing against stuff. You're not really playing against like negates, right? The only negate that you really have to play against is like Retribution. And if you DD Crow the Albion, your opponent can't get to Retribution unless they hard open it. The only sets that they're gonna have is gonna be like Fallen and Virtuous or like a Super Poly. And of course, like if they hard open it, then they do. But other than that, you're just really playing through like bodies and interruption. You're not necessarily playing through like your standard negation. If you're just trying to play through the board, it's always nice to have something like DD Crow or Abyssfield to be able to answer a Fallen Valbaz when there's a Renbrum engrave as well. Your opponent only has one Fallen Valbaz, they have two Welbaz usually. So this is going to be something that you really want to keep in mind, because if you want to be able to break the board and you don't really want to have to deal with the Fallen of Albaz fuse off your board, you're going to want to have an answer for that. Nibiru is a really funny card in this matchup because you can almost always use it on both turns because there's just so many bodies hitting the board every single turn. And Nibiru isn't necessarily like the best card. I really like it into like Doom Z, but for the most part, this card is like pretty bad at the moment, so I probably wouldn't run it. But if you do, this is gonna be like one of the applicable game states that you can use it on. The other thing here is gonna be Fua, Perulia, both very good here, and then Super Poly and a Dogma. If your opponent sets up their board, they go Ecclesia, tag out, summon Fallen, and then they go Fallen pitch and use Super Poly for Dogma, you hit them for a lot. So that's something to really keep in mind, because you also clear their follow-up by Dogma shuffling. Ash and the High Spirits, you really want to make sure that your opponent doesn't get a free send-off High Spirits and then a free send-off Wildbaz. It's a lot of free advantage for your opponent and a lot of follow-up. You can definitely Ogre the Dark Dragon because you don't want your opponent to be able to get the Cartesia. Then you can also just hold Ogre if you're more afraid of Fallen hitting the board and trying to fuse off your board. And then last but not least, Bell Imprim Veiler. Just stop the Wildbaz. Don't let it resolve, right? This is a card that you just don't want your opponent to be able to get a ton of advantage off of. Next up here is Doom Z. Again, I really do like Nibiru into this matchup. Usually paired is where it's going to be the best. But DD Crow is going to be such a shining star in this format, and I'll talk about it here in Doom Z as well. A lot of times your opponent is going to be doing the rank 4 line with the Dracia. They're going to be able to set that off the Alara and then be able to go into their Power Patron Doom Z, equip this from Grave, pop the Power Patron, summon out of 4, get a free search, and that's going to get them into their Sargus line. So this is where, if you really want to cut them off, you can early on just DD Crow the Adrastia when they try to re-equip it. The other early on line is that if they go for the rank 4 line without this, and they want to use their Regulus, before they get to summon their Regulus, you will DD Crow the Power Patron Doomsday out of their graveyard, because not only can they not pop it once it's equipped to their Regulus and get a free search, they're also not going to be able to summon the Regulus because they're not going to have a machine engrave, which is extremely important as well. So you cut them off multiple lines. The Adrastia is also going to be follow-up on the first one here. And that's something where if you banish it early on and then they can't use it to pop and get a free 4 out to the board, you also cut off a lot of their follow-up. The next one here, being the best one in my opinion to banish, is going to be Destruction. Usually your opponent will send a Destruction off change and then quick pop the change so that they can add back the Destruction. And then when they go to do that, you DD Crow the Colossus-esque effect, and then you don't have to deal with it. Fua, Perulia, Droll, all very strong here. Super Poly is not until Magnificent Monsters when we get the hero, because that's inverse Mud Dragon. They can be the same type but different attributes, and that's exactly what the Doomsday end board is. bunch of machines, a lot of different attributes. If your opponent has to start the Clockwork line, you're going to want to build a Validium because their hand's really weak and this could just make them pass turn altogether. You're going to want to Ash Raiders because your opponent is just trying to get to Raiders because they want to be able to resolve their Raiders and Glyphario after they pop it and get the double effect. And that's something that we just don't want to have happen, right? So you're going to want to Ash Raiders. The next one here is Ogre. You're going to want to hit the upgrade effect of Drastia. You just don't want your opponent to get their boss monster. You can hit the Vidolia because it does represent either the Zexal or the Verudgerus. And that's something that you want to make sure you just cut off. You don't let your opponent get to that. This is going to be something that's pretty important in this matchup, depending on if you want to deal with the Drastrius or if you want to deal with like an actual negation on the board, right? So definitely keep that in mind whenever you're trying to sequence your cards. But hitting the field spell, I feel like, is a lot crazier against pure power patron, and we'll talk about that. But in this scenario, I definitely am always hitting the Drastia upgrade effect because the Drastrius, alongside Destruction, being untargetable, it can be really hard to deal with. Then the best starter for your opponent is going to be the Alara. Definitely go ahead and Baylor Imperm this so they can't get the Adrastia out in rotation. That's something that you don't want to have happen because your opponent can get pretty far with that. The next one that I have for today is going to be Fairy Tale, and I've gotten a absolute ton of questions about this deck, and I've done extensive research into this deck to make sure that you guys know exactly what to do. And the number one thing that you want to do is stop Wiccat. Just stop it with whatever you got. Ash, Veiler, Imperm. And if you have an extra interruption via like an extra Veiler or an Imperm and your opponent leads Zorora, then you can hit that. But it's going to feel real bad if you do, and then they just overlay Wiccat, right? So something that you definitely want to keep in mind. This card is very strong, allowing them to get to some very powerful cards for the archetype and then be able to continue their turn and set up a pretty full board. If you can't stop Wiccat and you only open like Bell, it's really important here that you're going to just stop the match, because when the match tries to reborn itself, you can also like DD Crow this too, but you're going to want to hit the equip instead, and we'll talk about that. But when it tries to reborn itself, it's going to summon itself and search ball, and that's going to be a negate on its own and also a search. So that's something that you want to make sure that you were cutting this off early on. And with the equip spell, you want to banish this. It's only a one of. If they want to play an additional one, it's not the greatest. But when it tries to come back to the board to equip, they're going to get a free summon. And also, this is how they're going to be able to fusion. So this is something where when it's trying to come back to the board to equip, DD Crow it right away, and your opponent's going to be in a really awkward spot. And then if it's already on the board and they're trying to fuse, Ogre it. And that's going to be really awkward for your opponent. And if you see your opponent trying to bridge with an Artemis in the spell trap zone and you haven't seen the equip spell yet, you probably should just Ogre the Artemis so your opponent doesn't get to bridge into both engines. Hua, Perulia, Droll, Super Poly, all very effective in this matchup. But if there's anything that I can leave you with, stop the Wiccat and banish the equip spell. You're probably going to be okay. The next one I have for today is going to be Power Patron. This is going to be the pure variant. And I really don't like Perulia or Super Poly in this matchup. I really like Fua and Droll, though, both very strong. You're going to want to use your Veiler Imperm onto Beyond or Shade, whichever one you see first. This is going to be the most surefire way to make sure your opponent just like does not do what they want to do. And then you have Ogre onto Vidolia. Again, it's going to be a lot stronger here because you're really just like playing Power Patron, right? So you're just trying to get your pendulums out and make sure that they don't get to. Bell onto Validium is actually really crazy. Not only does it deny them a search because it's just like not going to the extra deck, it's also stuck in their scale, and I think that's really impactful. The other one here is going to be either DD Crow on Medius if it's trying to come back to the board. Some builds play things like Theorize and whatnot, right, just to be able to get it engraved, to be able to get a free way to Medius. You can DD Crow it if they are, and then Ash it if it's on the board so that you can make sure that this card does not resolve. A lot of times they're just going to summon out Nervado and then get to recapture with the non-finito so that they can combo unimpeded by monster effects. And then you also just have DD Crow to be able to target one of the Charmer, and Quartet, and Bloom targets so that they don't get the summon either. A lot of people are summoning Floodgates off these because they can't be super polyed. Now, I've talked about Kewl Tune quite often because of the fact that this is a deck that you don't really want to hand trap. If you have Bell, Veiler, Imperm, you can hit most of the normal summons. And, Ash on KTS is really strong too, but a lot of times you're going to want like Valor Ash because they go like normal Q, and then you Valor, they chain KTS, you chain Ash. In a perfect world, they pass. But sometimes this deck opens really crazy, or a lot of times it's like 4 hand traps and 1 starter, right? So that's something that is really frustrating for many. But a lot of times this is just like the best way to go about it. A lot of times I really like combating this deck in other ways, not with Nibiru, Ogre, or Crow. They're pretty bad in this deck, but a lot of times you need a mix of like breakers and hand traps. But you also want to play things like Vision, Desires in your draw cards with your Mulch Armies, and Super Poly a lot of times because you can change the top deck, you can change known information, you can create that variance by having extra draw cards and just denying your opponent the knowledge of the additional cards you get into. And then you can force them into things like Remix Pass if they see a Super Poly, or they'll go like Maker Set Double KTS Pass, right? Because they can't really set up a full board. Anything they summon for the most part is a tuner. So if you have Super Poly, it's definitely going to be something that is pretty scary to see. And when you're drawing extra cards with things like Vision or Desires, it's going to create that variance to where your opponent's going to be like, well, I knew what was in their hand, now I don't know what the other two are. So this is going to be a scarier turn than what it would have been, right? So definitely something to keep in mind when it comes to this matchup. If you play against the light and dark variants, I'm assuming that it's going to be like Mitsurugi as like the most prominent one. Things like Fua will really depend on what kind of variant they're playing. Perulia is usually very good, Droll and Super Poly. If you DD Crow the add back of the spell, it's going to be really solid because your opponent just doesn't get to be able to ritual summon without this card. And then also make sure that their swordsman's not a towers because that card's really crazy. Same with being able to just like bell the ritual spell when it tries to add itself back. Just don't let them get back to the ritual spell so they can just like keep going, right? Then Ash on the corrupted ritual records. This card just effectively preparation of rights for the deck. And then you want to Ogre Mind Shuffle. This card's very strong. You want to Ogre it because a lot of times they can Grief on both turns. They can Mind Shuffle on both turns, and they're just trying to add as much engine as possible. So just make sure that you get rid of this so your opponent cannot just keep adding. And then last, if your opponent summons the Celtic Sage, definitely Valor Imperm this so your opponent doesn't get the free Graceful Charity, right? Especially if they're playing the Mitsu variant. This is very, very strong. And I feel like that's probably going to be one of the crazier builds of the Set Nationals. The last one after today is going to be Elf Note. You can use Fua, Perulia, Droll, all very strong. Super Poly's a little weird because you have Panzer for Crystal Wing, Dawn Dragster. You have Secretarian, which is going to be any Elf Note and Crystal Wing. The end board of this deck really depends on what variant they're playing and if they're going for like the hand loop, right? Like the Dissipator, Double Omega, and Tinia rip, which is just so degenerate. But that's why I really like Nibiru because you can either use it paired into Crystal Wing and have like Nib plus Imperm, right? And then be able to just like blow out the board anyways. But you can also use it on Fist Summon Omega so that your opponent doesn't get like the double rip, which is really important. You can also DD Crow the target of Rhapsodia so they don't get the negate. They also don't get the Reborn because those cards are also pretty crazy interruptions. And then if your opponent Strelitzias, a lot of times they're just trying to reborn the Power Patron Elf Note so they can go for the 8 and the Fist Summon. So you just preemptively banish the Elf Note Power Patron from the grave, and your opponent just won't be able to get that. You can also Bell Rhapsodia if you're really worried about your opponent getting the free negate. And then Valor Imperm onto Medius. Of course, you don't want your opponent to be able to get to the Elf Note Power Patron early and make like the Librarian, right? And then keep going, which is crazy. Or again, they can just summon out non finito after they have Nervado and get to recapture and then be able to play that way. You can also hit Welcome Home with Asher Ogre. A lot of times, especially with Ogre, it just feels brutal because they activate this, they use it, they pitch a card, you Ogre it, they go down 2, right? Or even just ashing it and making your opponent go down 1. And then they also use the Welcome Home, right? So they just start on way less cards. You can also Ogre Dawn Dragster, which is cool because it has to lose levels to negate. And then last but not least, you can always just Ash the Medius too when it comes out to the board so that you don't have to worry about extra Nervado, recapture, what have you. So definitely going to be something you want to keep in mind versus this matchup. If you enjoyed today's video, definitely let me know down below in the comment section and I'll catch you all in the next one. Thank you.